So welcome everyone to Chevalier's Books Online. We are LA's oldest indie bookstore, established in 1940. Tonight, we are here to celebrate Chris Stuck's debut short story collection, Give My Love to the Savages. The 9 tales in this book explores the thorny intersections of race, identity, and Black life through an extraordinary cast of characters, which we can't wait to dive into. Here to interview the author, we have Dana Johnson, who is the author of the short story collection In the Not Quite Dark, and also the author of Break Any Woman Down, winner of the Flannery O'Connor Award for Short Fiction, as well as the novel Elsewhere. With Dana, we of course have our featured author, Chris Stuck. Chris has been a fiction fellow at the Fine Arts Work Center, the Callaloo Writers Workshop, and the Oregon Literary Arts Fellowship. He's a Pushcart Prize winner, and his work has been published or is forthcoming in American Literary Review, Bennington Review, and many other publications. So without further ado, please give a very warm, although digital welcome to our 2 speakers tonight, Dana Johnson and Chris Stuck. If the 2 of you would please take it away.
All right.
Thanks.
So Chris and I just met like 3 minutes ago before we started this. And I was just like really excited to meet you because this book is so damn good and really just really smart, really funny. And so I'm ready to get into it. And first of all, congratulations. And I've been reading reviews and they're amazing. So
yeah,
you should
thank you.
be feeling a little puffed up about that.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So I thought I would start with kind of a basic question, which is about the title, Give My Love to the Savages. And it's from the title story of the collection, which is like a tour de force. And it's that line, Give My Love to the Savages, is said by a racist father during the LA riots to his biracial Black son. But you've gone and made this the title of this collection, but it feels like you turn it on its head in a way. You know, it's like, it feels more like a reclamation of the word savage. And it's like somehow like coming from a place of like love and power of Blackness. So I'm just wondering if that's kind of, I don't know what you had in mind by calling the book this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. That line actually came from just doing research for the story. I think I found some articles about the riots. I think it was like the 20th anniversary or something. And someone actually in the comments of like a newspaper article basically was saying it in a derogatory way against Black people. And I think they said best of luck to the savages. And that was originally the title of the story, but it didn't roll off the tongue as well as, and then I changed it to Give My Love, and it just kind of changed the meaning of it for me. But essentially, yeah, I mean, I think when I finally got the title and I had some of these other stories, I realized it was probably going to be the title story. And then it kind of informed, and it kind of made me go into some of the more bolder, I guess, characters in the collection and allowed me to, you know, stick my foot all the way in it, I guess, and go into, you know, sort of, you know, you have to come up with like your little tagline for the book. So, you know, the American racial experience, especially for Black folks, is like love and savagery against us. There's obviously this new form of the word sort of with hip hop, like being a savage and just basically not taking no shit, but also being kind of ratchet too, or whatever you want to call it.
Thank you, Megan Stallion.
Yeah. So I wanted to go into that a little bit and have it, you know, mean a bunch of different things at once, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, I love it for that, because, you know, by the time you read that last story and you get to that line, it's like, oh, wow, okay, I see what, you know, Chris is doing there. This question I was going to ask later, but it's kind of connected to how you just answered this question about the title and sort of going bold, going for broke. Like the first title in this story is collection is Every Time They Call You a Nigger. And that's the kind of like first story that's just like signals to readers, I'm not playing with you.
Right.
Like we're about to go where we need to go, right?
Yeah, we're going.
Yeah. And so I guess I want to talk to you about that sort of like, you know, signaling with this first story and the conversation then that this whole book ends up having about sort of, you know, America and America's racism and Blackness and the many sort of ways in which the word is used. I don't know, I just want to talk about how you came to this story and the placement
Sure.
of it in the collection and all of that.
So yeah, basically that was the second to last story I wrote in the book. And I had the collection, but it kind of wasn't fully there yet. And then one day I was just thinking about when I'd been called that word. And basically that's the most autobiographical story I've ever written. And the first scene is basically what happened to me when I was in kindergarten. You know, some kid called me a nigger. So, and then I started to think about all the other times and how sometimes it wasn't as blatant as other times, and it's just how the words sort of changed over my life. I'm, you know, 45, getting ready to be 46. So, you know, I grew up in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s in Virginia. So that word was flying around a lot. So but then also, you know, with hip hop, I remember when it first came in with hip hop, like at one point, hip hop, you know, during the break dancing era, like you never heard that word. And then once it kind of got into sort of the more gangster rap situation, then you started to hear it like a lot, and just how it's changed and how in my life it kind of seemed to disappear slightly. And then all of a sudden you realize it never went anywhere. And because sometimes I've heard people read that story and they're like, so that's just it? Like nothing changes? I'm like, has anything changed? I mean, you know, so that's why I wanted to start the collection. Also, I wanted to bookend it with the title story because those are two, you know, biracial characters. And obviously the first one is based on me. The title story, Give My Love to Savages, is just, I just made him up. Like I've never had any of his interactions or how that ever happened. Like in the title story, some people keep calling him a white boy. Like that's never happened to me. Other Black people were calling him white boy too, and like that never was my experience. But I know other mixed people who did have that kind of experience sometimes. But luckily, I never did. But as far as the title story, I mean, the first story, I just knew it was going to be, I was going to write it as an essay. Didn't work in first person. I switched to second person, and all of a sudden I just wrote it in like a day and a half or so, just because I knew the material. It was my, you know, my life. And then like halfway through the story, I had to like diverge and go a different route and make stuff up. So it wasn't just me. And because I've gotten caught up in writing maybe autobiographical stuff that just didn't go anywhere because I couldn't make things up. It was too like anchored in reality that I couldn't just make things up. So
right.
But I knew it was going to catch people's attention, especially since I'm not shying away from the word. I'm not saying every time they call you the N word. I do, you know. So and I feel a little weird about that story just because, you know, I don't want to like peddle in like Black trauma or something like that, but at the same time it means something to me. And so I figured, you know, why not? But at the same time, I did know, like even when I solicited agents, I knew that's what I sent them because I knew they were gonna be like, whoa, what's this? So yeah. But
did you ever hear any negative feedback about it? Like, you know what, this is like too much, like maybe something else? Or
no, not really. The only thing is like I know with some publicity stuff, they're like, oh, we want to run an excerpt of this, but we don't know if we can use the whole word. What do you think? I'm like, do whatever you think is best. I get it if you know, wherever you're showing this, like might not feel comfortable with that word just being like blasted everywhere. But no, I think for the most part, everyone's really receptive to it. And some people get how it is based on me, and some people don't even notice, you know? So,
Well, because
yeah.
of course I don't know you, so I wasn't thinking.
Right. I left a couple Easter eggs in that story, like when he said in the I think it's the second section where it says like my last name is German, you know, and so yeah, my dad's white, my mom's black, and so some people don't know what Stuck is, but it's a German name and it means peace, like a piece of something, and so I dropped that in there. Only a few people really catch that, you know. So, but yeah.
I think, you know, I love that it's the first story of this collection because it's confronting, but it's also like, you know, it's just basically holding up a mirror to America, right? And so to sanitize it with like in asterisks is kind of too cute for what we're going through right now. You know what
exactly.
I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just speak on it and be truthful about like what that word means in our history, you know.
Yeah, because you know, every Black person has a relationship to that word in a good way, bad way, all kinds of ways, you know. And that's why even like when I'm talking about hip hop, like, and counting that as every time I've been called nigger, because I remember when it, you know, Wu-Tang Clan came out and you hear it all over their first album, you're just like, whoa, what is this? But then how the word sort of exemplifies like street cred or how tough you are, the fact, and now it's to the point that like Asian rappers are saying, I mean, some white rappers are saying, you know, nigga, you know what I mean? So it's strange. But
it makes me think too of like, you know, when I was growing up and hearing like, you know, Richard Pryor records and seeing Richard Pryor, like I felt like because we're close to the same age, not quite. I'm like 53 and you're like a little young, a lot younger than I am, but that same era of like sort of like that word coming into sort of like the popular Black sort of usage, you know.
Yeah, and he had, I mean, he had a couple albums called like, one was like what, That Nigger's Crazy, or Bicentennial Nigger, and like a lot of books actually, you know, especially like Black Power books. My dad was kind of a hippie, so he had a lot of Black Power books, and a lot of them used the word, like Dick Gregory's autobiographies, nigger, you know, nigger autobiography of Dick Gregory. And so I also wanted to kind of tie into that a little bit, because actually in the story I mentioned, just diving into my parents, their books from back in the day, and exposing myself to, you know, Blackness, I guess, in art. And I guess, you know, even Richard Pryor has that famous routine. I can't remember which special it was on, but where he was saying, I'm not going to say that anymore. And I think it was after he went to Africa, he said, I'm not saying nigger anymore. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know. It's cool. It's cool what like as a first story in a collection, you know, the sort of deal you make with the reader, which is to never let us off easy, you know, like this book is so funny in so many ways, but it's also devastating in so many ways too. And so that takes me to my next question, which is about, you know, you write very satirically about these things. And even if some of the stories have like a foot in realism, there's always something a little odd about them, you know, like characters named Tammy Faye, or like, you know, certain things that are just like, this is so weird and absurd, but like, so is our actual lives right now. Like there's something about your satirical approach to the subject matter that I think, again, it's very complicated. And so, I don't know, I guess I want to ask you about that, about satire and talking about these kinds of things and writing about them in the ways that you do. Like why satire for you, and why that kind of slippery slope between that slippage rather between satire and realism in a lot of these pieces. And for those of you who don't have the book, you know, there's a man who wakes up to discover that he's an actual penis. And there's a whole story about him being a penis. And then there's another great story about this sort of Black Republican turning white because he has vitiligo. There's like so many odd and wonderful, strange things. So can you just talk about that, like your approach to some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to sort of my reading habits too. I think I have one foot in reading like just straight realism, and then one foot in reading satire. But at the same time, I kind of want to meld the two. Like I can't go as far as Ishmael Reed or someone that can write some crazy genius level off the wall stuff. Like I need, for some reason, I have to have it rooted at least partly in, except for the penis story, at least partly in reality. And then a lot of times I'm looking just for strange details, and I'm just amusing myself really. And because I'd show people stories and they'd be like, oh, I like how this is like satirical. And I'm like, is it? I wasn't even thinking like that's what I was doing. I was just thinking like, I was just trying to be funny or make something that sounded funny to me, or come up with an interesting detail that I've never seen, or just a new kind of story. Some of this book is a response to just some of the stories that, you know, Black narratives sometimes are kept in a certain space, or the stories that we get or put out by publishing or Hollywood, or sometimes stuff maybe we've seen before, or or stuff that I don't want to say too easy or anything like that, but I just want to see something new. And if I've been writing for a long time. I've been reading for a long time. So at some point you want like new stuff and see something interesting. I think that's why a lot of people like have sort of latched on and won't let go of the Get Out narrative, because that's like maybe one of our newest different narratives that all of a sudden, but now everyone is just like really on it, even though that movie came out like 4 years ago, maybe, I think. And I get why, but at the same time, I just want like there is this video of T-Pain, T-Pain is he was complaining that rappers are like, he was just screaming into the mic like, do something else. He was just like, we already have this, do something else. So that's all I ever want in fiction. I'm always looking for something like new and just different. So
well, that's what I love about this book. I was just feeling like, wow, I haven't really read stories like this necessarily, like, and you brought up Ishmael Reed earlier, and did you see that New Yorker article?
Yeah, I just read that yesterday.
Yeah, it's like, I love it because he's so cranky and
he's hilarious. I love him.
And he said, what you said, which is like, there's a certain kind of African-American narrative that the publishing world is in love with. And it's usually something that's like goes down easy, like ice cream, like it's kind of like that. And then it's also very commercial.
Right.
Oftentimes. So, like when someone like Ishmael Reed, he's not playing that, right? He's still publishing with this little publishing house because that's where the freedom is, like, because otherwise he's going to have to write, I don't know, like the next slave narrative, like everybody's got to write their narrative for, Random House or whoever to publish. But like, yeah, again, like that first story in this collection signals you're not that kind of writer. Like you not going to do that. And I love that about this collection and that, yeah.
Well, that's also like not to, kiss it, or kiss up to you, but that's why I like your writing. I mean, Danzy Senna, ZZ Packer, people that aren't gonna like do like they're up-to-date stories of Black folks nowadays. And like even one of the stories in here sort of pays homage to like you and other writers, just a Black couple going on vacation. Like it's not necessarily about race. It's more about them being American, but I also wanted, like, there aren't a ton of stories like that for Black people. I think that's like why my mom was like really into like Terry McMillan when her books first came out. And I remember seeing that movie with her, and it was just nothing but Black women in the theater. And you got the vibe, like they saw themselves on the screen, you know? And, I just want to write stuff partially about that too. I mean, we don't get those kind of things very often, or, sometimes it's like you write about, LA and bad stuff about being in the quote unquote inner city or whatever, but it goes beyond those kind of things too. You know what I mean? It's not just, some people just fall into just what's expected, and they think because other people did, I can do it too. And then it just becomes the same old thing, so.
Yeah, like I just, I never read stories when I was a kid where there's just like regular Black people in the suburbs going to 7-Eleven and nobody's in a gang, nobody,
Right.
like
yeah, exactly.
Led Zeppelin, somebody's doing this. And I just was like, where are those stories? Like, it's always this other thing that kind of sells and goes down easy. So again, like, thank you for saying that about me. That's what I love about this book of yours. And you made me think too of, it was the story, and then we were the Norrises. And that story is really cool to me because you're talking about class and Black people in a way that is very, very complicated and nuanced. So again, not to give the story away, but just there's this Black family who was wealthy and now they're under witness protection because something shady went down. And so they're in this area where it's sort of like low rent for them, but not for the like the white best friend of this character named Chuck Norris. This is the kid named Chuck Norris to stay like under witness protection. It's so funny. And then his best friend is called Sterling, his name is Sterling Silver, which is just funny. But like, I just love the way the story has a lot of movement of, rich Black folks, but also these poor white people who are kind of, just because they're well off and educated and the mom's Harvard and Yale educated, that of course, they experience racism just like anybody else. But then there's also that kind of resentment from like the guy who's sort of in charge of making sure they're okay. There's some sort of like nascent resentments that he has about their sort of upward mobility. So there's just like a lot of things going on in the story. So I just wanted you to talk about it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think that story, like all the stories, I'm trying to find, I guess, just complications and things to riff on and examine. With that one, that has a lot of stuff going on. There's like sexuality, there's masculinity. I mean, that's why I named him. And he's like a Black genius. He's a Black gay genius who's in witness protection. And so sometimes and a lot of times I do this in stories is I kind of put 5 pounds in a 10 pounds in a 5 pound bag. And sometimes it works and sometimes it just, and then I have to like cut out stuff. But with that, I guess, I wanted to examine, I just wanted to have, I think I got to the family part and I was like, man, how do I make this family like dynamic and have it be interesting? And then I thought, well, what if they have to be like regular now? And there used to be, and that's another thing a lot of people have said is there are a lot of like Black professionals in this collection. And that's something I was kind of doing on purpose and kind of, it just happened. But also, that's another narrative you don't get to see a lot is successful Black people. Like Black success is in people think of like Beyonce and Jay-Z and the Obamas or the Huxtables, and that's like it. Like there's no continuity to that narrative, and so I wanted to throw that in there and just sort of like even their history, like how he could trace himself back to a freed slave, but then somehow the family had gotten more and more influence, and then they kind of became bad people. So now this is like their lives are kind of been reset, and but then also just like naming him Chuck Norris, I knew he was, at some point I realized he was, what if he's realizing he's gay, and
Right.
but the people put this name on him, and especially, and the story takes place in the 80s. I mean, that was kind of like, I was probably like 10 years old when the story is taking place, and just thinking about that time, thinking about what it was like in the 80s, and just how no one was really aware of how other people really felt, and how masculinity was like, unless if you weren't a man, it like something was wrong with you. So, and the fact that it's just the irony of like, of course they name him Chuck Norris, and they name after a white, it's not like a Black masculine guy, it's a white masculine guy. And so it's just, I wanted to play with all these different, I like depth and layers in stories, and just to make it interesting for me to play around with, or create a puzzle that I can mess around with and see where it goes. But
I love the details in that story too, just again, like their sort of their exposure to porn, like the
right.
access to it's something so 80s about all of that.
I made all that up. I never did any of that
yeah,
stuff.
I'm sure.
Never.
But yeah, and then there's this amazing line that was so true. You wrote something like, and I'm going to butcher your sentence, but it was something like, because it was the 80s, we weren't properly supervised, or something like that.
Right.
Which is so true. Like in the 80s, I grew up like, you just kind of like were left to your own devices. Parents weren't really checking in the way they check now with their
Not
kids.
at all. Yeah. I mean, they meant well there, but it was sort of like, now you see people with kids and they like monitor them. Like we were off, as long as we got back home at a certain time, like we were off doing all kinds of stuff. So burning stuff down and getting into wrong stuff, stealing stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Something else that I noticed in this collection, like very strongly, is how you take us sort of across the country, right? Like these stories are set in a lot of different places, and like Portland, LA, Missouri, Arizona, Northern California, and the story, This Isn't Music, I think that's set in Missouri, right?
Yeah.
And there's something about those two Black characters being in Missouri informs sort of like their Black identities and how they relate to each other. And so I guess I'm just wondering, I'm just interested in your use of place in these, where these stories are taking place all over, and the importance of that, again, in terms of Black literature and showing sort of different people in different places, that sort of myriad experience. Could you talk a little bit about place and how it's working?
Yeah. I think at some point I realized I didn't want to write a collection that just took place in one, like Ed Jones has DC, Lost in the City, and that's his, territory. And I guess I've been lucky enough to move around, and I've lived a few different spots, or, on the West Coast, East Coast. Like my mom, I grew up in Virginia mostly, but my dad's from up near Seattle. And so I lived there in the mid 80s for like 5 years. And, I've lived in, Massachusetts, other places. And I think I realized I was trying to maybe set the collection apart a little bit by having it so instead of like be one town, the town would be America, I guess, essentially.
Mhm.
And then I realized I could do different things. Because originally, you know, I'm from Virginia and I was just writing about Virginia. And I remember someone said, like, yo, you should just write about New York, man. No one's gonna care about Virginia. And this is a long time ago. And I'm just like, huh, you know, and then, you know, much later after I'd written a few bad novels, I noticed I was setting stories in different places. Like I got stuck in Missouri one time. A car broke down. I was driving across country. I got stuck in Missouri for like 2 weeks. So that's why I said that story there in this town I was in. And there was like a quarry near there. And it was just, I'd never seen a quarry before. And it was just like this big open hole. So, you know, I ended up setting a story there. And then the LA story. And then I was thinking like, man, none of these stories. And then I think basically the first one is in Virginia because that's just where I'm from. And then the cowboy story is in Virginia. But then I was like, man, none of these other stories are. So what's the continuity? And then I started to think like, oh, what if I just do America? And I think that's why I write about in a satirical way too, is because then with satire, sometimes you can attack in an issue in a very direct way, like the way Ishmael Reed sort of attacks things. Like he could just, I mean, that's why his stuff, he's so bold that I just couldn't be as bold as, because he's writing like, you know, he's writing about Lin Miranda Manuel, or I'm not sure how you say his name, but like, who would think to write write a play about somebody like that? But so I think that's, and then, you know, everyone talks about the absurdity of being Black in America or being a person of color or anyone in any marginalized community being in America. I mean, America itself, I mean, you know, sometimes I think about how the brightness of the colors of the American flag, when I think of like writing, sometimes I think of like colors in a weird way. I don't know why, but so I want it to be bright and even down to like people, they go to the Black Republican story takes place on a cruise. Like my black family, they go on cruises like crazy. You know what I mean? So that's like, to me, that's like completely American, even though people go on cruises from other countries. But yeah, and that's nothing against collections that are about, you know, one place or like Rion M. Carr Scott, he writes about a made up place not too far from where I'm from in Maryland. And I mean, I think that's dope. I mean, that's awesome that he does that. But I guess I wanted to just do something different. So
yeah, no, I mean, I noticed it very much. And I like that because I tend to write about California and LA a lot, although I'm sure to the South or like other places every once in a while. But I liked it because it just, to me, it was just that thing of like, you know, we're everywhere and our experiences vary depending on where we are and like the context of that. And, you know, so that couple in This Isn't Music, you know, they're called Black Boy, Black Girl, and they're married to white partners and they're in this very white space and they're kind of missing each other in terms of their interactions. And so for me in that story, place was so important. Like that's not the same story if it's in like New York City.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Can you see me all right? Am I normal? Oh, okay. For a second it was glitchy for a second, but
oh, it's probably my end. I'm zooming from Alabama, and so I'm on vacation here with my husband. And so anyway, we're in the middle of nowhere. So,
okay, cool.
Kind of, yeah, that's
so it's a little late for you.
I know it is. It's
thank you, doubly thank you for doing this.
No, of course, but I guess I want to make sure you have a chance to read.
I'm fine talking. I'm fine talking.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm kind of tired of reading these stories. I feel like I'm reading the same ones.
Okay.
But yeah, as far as that story goes, I wrote that story a long time ago, and probably like early 2000s, and I lost it, and I couldn't find. I think I lost it on a hard drive that crashed or something, and I had to kind of recreate it. And much later, like 10 years later, I was like, well, that was a pretty good story. Let me try and rewrite it. And then all this other new stuff came out, like the black girl, black boy stuff. And I realized, it's just another way of finding complications with the story and making, I think through complications, you get depth in stories. And I've been in situations where you're the only person of color in a very white environment, and just what that feels like. And I thought, well, what if they were the only two people in this situation? And then I thought, like, what if they were put together just because, you're the two black people here, you guys should date. And then how they were more like siblings more than lovers, even though they actually went that far with it, I guess. But
yeah.
And my partner, she's grown up in small towns, and I've been lucky enough to visit some of them, and so some of it was a play on that, and just sort of, and I even have like sort of small town relatives back in Virginia that just like, this is where I was born, this is where I'm staying, and then I've been in situations where you leave home, and you come back, and that's kind of why he's kind of an asshole in the story, just because he knows what's out there, and now he's back to being, I guess it's similar to the Norris's story, he's back to being in a place where he's got to be, a regular like everyone else in order to get by. And so yeah, basically whenever I'm writing, I'm always trying to just complicate things for the character, and like, that's why his wife is sort of like, why don't you like it here? It's so great. And he's just like, this fucking sucks, So, and then that makes him act out. So then there we go. But
yeah, I like that she's so charmed by like his partner, his wife is so charmed by like the small town aspects of it. And, and to him, it just means like failure or something.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Another great story in this collection. I was trying to pick my favorite, and I guess it is, and then there were the Norrises, but I also really love Lake No Negro,
Right.
which is a play on Lake Oswego. Is that how you pronounce the lake?
Yeah.
And again, not to give the story away because folks need to read the story, but there's something interesting about the setup of this, which is a Black man going to a space where there are no other Black people, and yet he's been called to this couple's house because of his Blackness. And there's something cool, like the conversation you're having about, white America's schizophrenia about Blackness. Like they don't want Black people around, and yet they covet Blackness in these, in these ways. We've got this Black man who's just like, again, not to give the story away, it's really cool how it unfolds. But in general, it's a bigger conversation to me, it seems, about, again, like how Blackness is, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, consumed? Is that the right word? I don't know, but can you talk more about, again, I don't know if we can even talk about the story without telling folks what it is, but.
Yeah, sorry. My stuff was glitching again. Yeah, I guess what that story was, this fetish. I can't even say this word. Fetishization.
That
yeah,
is, I slip up. Fetishization.
Yeah. So that's basically what I was trying to do with that story. When I moved to Portland in 2007, and some of the neighborhoods here have like really weird, they have nicknames, but some of them are racial. in a way that like turned me off, obviously, but then also like got my creative juices flowing. Like there's a suburb here called Hillsboro, and it has a large Hispanic community, and some people have called it Hills Burrito. And then Lake Oswego sort of has the opposite thing. Like Black people at one time weren't allowed in. They had like sunset laws basically, and so basically, you know, they call it Lake No Negro because no Black people, no Black folks were there, and you weren't like, you better leave before sundown kind of thing. And so I knew I was going to write a story about that. As soon as I heard someone call it that, I was like, whoa. And then a lot of my stories become like I'm thinking about two or three different things, and I put them together. And so I had that, and I had a friend of mine got into a relationship with kind of an open relationship. This is back in Virginia, and with a married woman, and her husband was cool with it. And I guess I guess they just had an open situation. So he would tell me about it. I'd be like, damn. And then that's crazy. And then when I moved to Portland, I found out that there were a lot of open relationships in Portland, I guess. And but that story kind of stalled on me for so long because I kind of didn't know where to take it. At one point I had him going with their whole situation, like this rich white couple were like, yo, you could just stay with it and be part of, and at one point I had him going like, and it had like a dark ending, and some people have compared it, not to mention Get Out again, but some people have sort of drawn parallels between that story and Get Out. I actually wrote the story way before Get Out. I have the dates on my old computer. But when Get Out came out, I was like, oh no. But then he went totally in a different direction with it, So, but yeah, basically it just started from the title, and that's probably one of the first times I ever had a title before I had the story. I just knew like I'm using this title.
Yeah.
I don't know what the story really is going to be, but and some of it was a response to when I moved to Portland. I moved here from Northern Virginia, and which is just right outside of DC, is very diverse. And so when I moved to Portland, although everyone's super cool, and it's just not diverse at all. And some of it was a response to that, because there was a lot of stuff I sort of cut out of that story where I was basically just roasting Portland for being not diverse. But it came off as like harsh, so I had to cut a lot of that stuff out. And yeah, so
I love how that story unfolds, because it's like, again, like, I'm glad that you let it be known that you wrote this well before Get Out, because it has that creepy factor where it's like, where is he driving? He doesn't know these people. And then this like very strange, kind of sleek, sophisticated white man comes out, and there's this elaborate dinner, and it's like, get out. Like, what are you doing? You need to get away from these people ASAP. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. And at one point I cut them out, but I used them in something else. But he had like some hippie, like pothead neighbors that are like, where are you going to dinner? And he tells them, and he's new to town. They're like, no, don't go out there. And they sort of give him a warning, but it just slowed the story down too much. So I just cut them out. And they were sort of an excuse to me to sort of lay in the history of why it's called Lake No Negro. Like in the story now, he kind of he's heard it's called that, but he doesn't know what it means. So just to add to the mystery of it. But yeah. But also, that's what I was going to get into is there's an Asian woman in the story, and I put her in it also just to show how Asian women especially are fetishes.
We know what you're
yeah, you know what I'm saying, right? I'll spell it out. But anyway, there's some white dudes that just like tiny Asian women for various reasons, and so I wanted to play around with that as well.
I love how you write her too, because she's the opposite of the stereotype. Like she's she's kind of hard and scary. Like I'm scared of her. Like,
Right.
what's going on? Run from her too, you know?
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to write like, I don't really write, maybe in the Chuck and Tina story where they go to Mexico, I go into her point of view, but other than that, the women in the stories, I wanted them to be strong in some kind of way. I'm from a family of a lot of strong Black women and white women on my father's side, and I wanted to put that in there, and like even This Is a Music, like how she was an arm wrestler at one point in her life, and just because you don't see that a lot, or sometimes especially Black women are put in certain characterizations that you see often and don't get varied, I guess. So
yeah, there's just like an amazing detail of her arm, like, and it does, like you describe like her physicality and how muscular she is, and I got this feeling like, oh wow, like she's just like, she is very strong, and
the guys
what?
the guys are weak. I was gonna say, and the guys can sometimes be weak. I wanted to play around with that dynamic.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, like how all the women are written in this book, really. I could keep talking to you forever, but I see that it is now time to open it up to like further questions from other folks. But it's just so amazing. I could keep talking to you, and again, like, congrats.
Yeah.
This is such a good book.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the Q&A. I do see that we've got a few queued up already. The first quick one is from Damien, who's asking if the Chuck from the story Chuck and Tina is the grown-up Chuck Norris, Bernard Black.
Yeah, no, he's not. But I noticed that later on. I'm like, oh, damn, there's two Chucks in this. But in my head, Chuck Norris and the Norris's one, I guess he could have ended up being with Tina eventually, but in my head he's gay. So, but yeah, I wondered about that.
All right, so we've got another question. This one's from Sam, who wants to know, Chris, if you think you have a memoir or personal essay collection in you, or do you think you're going to stick with fiction?
You never know. I've tried to write essays, and like I said, the first story in the collection I tried to write as an essay, and it was terrible. Like, it just didn't feel right. And so I don't know. Not at the moment. I'm kind of a fiction head. That's kind of the game I like to play. So
For sure. So we've got another one. This one's a bit longer. Oh, first off, congrats on the book, they say. Followed with, I loved it, but at the same time, I would get so angry at some of the characters and the choices they ended up making. Could you please talk a little bit about your thought process around creating characters and how you decided to pursue their story? This person would also like if Dana could chip in too about her process.
I mean, like, a lot of these characters are grappling with masculinity, and sometimes I wanted to go into that full force with some of them, because like the collection is about the absurdity of being, a Black man in America, but then it's also about the absurdity of masculinity itself, and just how dumb dudes are. So some of their choices, I think, are I guess what I'm trying to say is that the reason I have them do certain things is just to, like I say, complicate the story, and then also make it interesting for me. Like, if they're just behaving perfectly the whole time, it's not that much fun to write, and they're not learning very much. You know what I mean? I've been a fuck up, so I gotta have my characters fuck up sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I like really messy, complicated people. And I feel like all of us, like, sometimes you do likable things and sometimes you're not so great, right? And so I just feel like, why can't our characters be that, have those complications? And I'm just really not into characters being likable in general. Like, the people are who they are. They don't need to be liked. They just need to be living and doing what they do, and getting their stories told through their characters, right? So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, I know plenty of unlikable people, but I like them. So
Right.
We've got a question that was emailed into us from a Daryl, who says, Chris, was there a particular story that was the hardest for you to write? Or alternatively, if there was also an easiest story for you to write?
Yeah, the hardest one was probably the title story, just because it's set in LA. I'm not from LA. I know LA a little bit, but I'm not enough to just rattle off a bunch of details, especially from a time when I was like 17 or 18 when the LA uprising was happening. So that was hard. It took me a long time to get that right, and I had to sort of be intentionally vague in certain areas and do a lot of research in other areas, just to get the details even close to being, I guess, plausible or right. Like, I wonder how people from LA would read that story and be like, "Yo, you got this shit all wrong, bro." But then the easiest story was actually, is two of them, is the first story, because that's kind of based on my life, and then the story about the guy, the How to Be a Dick in the 21st Century. That one, for whatever reason, it came out. There's the last story I wrote, and maybe I don't know, I just got lucky and it just came out really fast, and I knew what I was doing from the get-go. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, they came out really fast.
So following up on that, we've got another question from Damien, two-parter. First one is, did you have a personal favorite in this collection? And then in a previous discussion, you also mentioned that you were surprised your editor wanted to open up with the story every time. If you could choose, which story would you have opened up with, if it would be a different book story?
No, I definitely wanted to open with that one. Just because it comes from me, and also just I knew it was going to be a bold way to start the book. And it's probably my favorite story. I mean, my favorite story changes all the time, like especially doing these virtual events. That's why I'm not too upset about not reading at this one, because it's hard to figure out what you're going to read. But then when I do read something, an excerpt out loud, I'm like, oh, I kind of like this story now. Or then I'm like, because I've read I read the first story a lot at some of these events, and I'm like, man, I got to read the story all over again. And it's just like, and if anyone has seen, like Damien, he's been at a few of these events, so I'm like, Damien's gonna be like, he read that story every time. So, but yeah, it changes. I mean, I like the title story. I like the story about the Black Republican, just because, or the one about the penis, because it cracks me up. But the one Dan and I were talking about, This Isn't Music, like that one, that was probably one of the first stories I wrote that I actually felt like their feelings in a weird way. And the ending was like, when I came up with the ending, I was like, man, this is like I got sad, and not emotional, but I got a little emotional when I figured out, like, oh, I'm not going to give the ending away, but it hit me. So like, that's a favorite. I mean, they're all my favorite stories, but some of them just, I remember what I was doing when I was writing them. And yeah, so.
Out of curiosity, were there any particular short stories that you had to cut from the collection that you were sorry to see go? And also, like, when you were putting the book together, how did you figure out that, like, this collection is complete? I'm not going to add any more short stories. I'm not going to cut any more short stories. This is it.
Well, it kind of morphed and changed over throughout, like trying to get an agent, and then my agent sending it out. Like this book was out on submission and getting nice rejections for like a year before anyone even touched it. And then by that time, I did take a story out, um, and and then I added the penis story. Once I realized, oh, like I need to hit the masculinity stuff a little bit in a more satirical way with the story. So that story just happened to come out really fast. And so when then we resubmitted to new editors, um, it was a different collection than the first batch of editors that they saw. But I mean, even on up to the final edits, it kept changing and changing. I mean, by then I had the story set, but the order changed. My editor kind of changed she moved the penis story up to the second story. I had it in the middle of the collection because I didn't know if people would be scared off if they read that story too early. And and yeah. So I mean, it changes all the way up. Like there's this idea, like once you sell the book, that's just bam. That's the way it's going to be. And there's like, but the story I had to get rid of, it was just, I'm still going to use it for a different collection maybe, but it just didn't fit the theme of this collection. So at some point you got to be truthful with yourself and just like give it the hook, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've got time for one last question. This one is sort of connected to what we just talked about from a Joanne Thompson, who wants to know how long did it take you to write all of these stories in the collection, and also wants to know how you transformed as a writer over time during that period.
Good question. It took me a long time. Like some of these stories I wrote when I was in graduate school. I graduated from grad school in 01. So technically I started my graduate program in the last century. I started in 98. So that, I mean, that's another thing. I have a long road to publication as far as than compared to some people. But so the cowboy story, I wrote that in like 98. I mean, these are terrible versions of it, you know, but and then the This Isn't Music, I wrote an early version of that was also terrible back then. And then but then the rest of the stories sort of kind of came to me from like 2007 on up till 2019. And obviously I was trying to write other things, and I was trying to write novels, and none of that stuff would stick or work out. So I'd always just kind of then go back and dabble with a story, and eventually they started getting better. I kind of realized what I was doing, and the way I changed, I guess, is I realized how you kind of have to teach yourself how to write. You don't realize that when you're doing it, I guess, sometimes. And just and then read a bunch of other people's stuff, reread stuff, and like I guess exercise your analytical mind and realize why I like this particular Dana Johnson story, or why I like a Danzy Senna story or whatever, and then see like how how they set things up, and then look back at your own writing, and sometimes you'll see that you've set things up that you were making the story go one way instead of following what the story was kind of you were subconsciously doing with the story. And once I've figured that kind of stuff out, I feel like I can get to what I'm trying to do faster now. Like I just finished a story maybe a month ago, and it was terrible. And I'm probably not going. It's like the idea is just not worth exploring. Like I finished it, I got to the ending, but now that I look back on, I'm like, it's not a good idea. So that's to the junk pile. But that's just now I'll let go of things really fast. Like I held onto a novel for like 10 years once, and it was that holding on to it held me back. If I had just let it go, it's like a bad relationship once you just get rid of it. Because if you're really writing, you're just like, you can write more eventually. Something else is going to come to you. So just keep, going at it.
Well, I think you had, after a 20-year journey, you had a really fabulous debut with Give My Love to the Savages. I'm going to tell everyone right now that you can still buy a copy of the book with a signed book plate from Chevaliers if you click on the link in the chat box. I want to say a big thank you to our speakers, Dana Johnson and Chris Duck tonight. Thank you so much both for sharing your time and expertise with us. So one last time, thank you, Dana. Thank you, Chris. Do either of
Thanks.
you have, I was gonna say, do you have any last words for us before we say goodbye for tonight?
No, I enjoyed our conversation so much, Chris, and I hope we cross paths in like real life sometimes. Be great.
Definitely. I'd love that. Thanks for doing this too.
My pleasure.
Thanks for everyone who showed up, you know.
Yeah. Good
All right,
night.
thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care.
Thanks.